This is a special report from ABC News Digital.
Hello everyone, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York with this ABC News Digital special report. Before President Obama can launch a strike on Syria, he is launching a campaign here at home, pulling out the big guns to make his case to Congress, turning to an old rival, Senator John McCain, to win over Congress. The question is, of course, will that be enough? The president is meeting with congressional leaders this morning and covering all the developments for us from Washington is ABC's Devin Dwyer. Devin, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Dan.
So who is the president meeting with today?
Well, the president's meeting with the top congressional leaders, as you mentioned, the leaders of all the Senate and House National Security Committees, the Armed Services Committee, Homeland Security Committee, et cetera. It's a group of about 20 folks, maybe a little bit less. Of course, House Speaker John Boehner will be there. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi will be there. Mitch McConnell and others. So this is the first time the president is going to have met with this team of people at the White House. And we're going to listen in.
The soberness and seriousness that it deserves is greatly appreciated, and I think vindicates the decision for us to present this issue to Congress. As I've said last week, as Secretary Kerry made clear in his presentation last week, we have high confidence that Syria used in an indiscriminate fashion chemical weapons that killed thousands of people, including over 400 children, and in direct violation of the international norm against using chemical weapons. That poses a serious national security threat to the United States and to the region. And as a consequence, Assad and Syria needs to be held accountable. I've made a decision that America should take action. But I also believe that we will be much more effective. We will be stronger if we take action together as one nation. And so this gives us an opportunity not only to present the evidence to all of the leading members of Congress and the various foreign policy committees as to why we have high confidence that chemical weapons were used and that Assad used them, but it also gives us an opportunity to discuss why it's so important that he be held to account. This norm against using chemical weapons that 98% of the world agrees to is there for a reason, because we recognize that there are certain weapons that, when used, can not only end up resulting in grotesque deaths, but also can end up being transmitted to non-state actors, can pose a risk to allies and friends of ours like Israel, like Jordan, like Turkey, and unless we hold them into account, also sends a message that international norms around issues like nuclear proliferation don't mean much. And so I'm going to be working with Congress. We have sent up a draft authorization. We're going to be asking for hearings and a prompt vote, and I'm very appreciative that everybody here has already begun to schedule hearings and intends to take a vote as soon as all of Congress comes back early next week. So the key point that I want to emphasize to the American people, the military plan that has been developed by our Joint Chiefs and that I believe is appropriate is proportional, it is limited, it does not involve boots on the ground. This is not Iraq, and this is not Afghanistan. This is a limited, proportional step that will send a clear message not only to the Assad regime, but also to other countries that may be interested in testing some of these international norms, that there are consequences. It gives us the ability to degrade Assad's capabilities when it comes to chemical weapons. It also fits into a broader strategy that we have to make sure that we can bring about over time the kind of strengthening of the opposition and the diplomatic and economic and political pressure required so that ultimately we have a transition that can bring peace and stability not only to Syria but to the region. But I want to emphasize once again, what we are envisioning is something limited. It is something proportional. It will degrade Assad's capabilities. At the same time, we have a broader strategy that will allow us to upgrade the capabilities of the opposition, allow Syria ultimately to free itself from the kinds of terrible civil wars and death and activity that we've been seeing on the ground. So I look forward to listening to the various concerns of the members who are here today. I am confident that those concerns can be addressed. I think it is appropriate that we act deliberately, but I also think everybody recognizes the urgency here and that we're going to have to move relatively quickly. So with that, to all of you here today, I look forward to an excellent discussion.
Mr. President, are you prepared to rewrite the authorization, and does that undercut any of your authority, sir?
You know, I would not be going to Congress if I wasn't serious about consultations and believing that by shaping the authorization to make sure we accomplish the mission, we will be more effective. And so long as we are accomplishing what needs to be accomplished, which is to send a clear message to Assad, degrading his capabilities to use chemical weapons, not just now, but also in the future. As long as the authorization allows us to do that, you know, I'm confident that we're going to be able to come up with something that that hits that mark. All right? Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so the president making his first on-camera statement after this weekend's statement, saying that he was going to consult with Congress before making any kind of action with regards to Syria. Congress, of course, reconvening after its recess on September 9th, and until that point, he will be holding meetings, as he is this morning, with congressional leaders there to discuss some of the possible military options. ABC's Mary Bruce is outside the White House, and I want to bring Mary into the fold on this one. Mary, what's the big headline that we heard from the president in that briefing?
Hi, Dan. It's arm twisting time. The president right now is trying to convince the congressional leadership to get on board to support this military strike, that he wants the U.S. to intervene in Syria. We know that the president has come out and said that he wants to intervene, but now, of course, he wants the congressional authorization to take that action. But if he doesn't get that, if Congress doesn't approve his request, it would be a huge international embarrassment for this administration. So the headline here is that the president believes that, of course, yes, he is confident he can get that vote, but right now he's trying to flood the zone and try and get members of Congress on board. And
Mary, the president is under a bit of a timeline right now, right? Because he is heading out to the G20 later on this evening.
That's right. The president really hasn't given himself a whole lot of time to do this arm twisting and try and convince Congress. As you mentioned, they're back next week, but the president departs the White House late tonight for Sweden. He's stopping there on his way to Russia for the G20 summit, where, of course, he'll have some interesting conversations, we imagine, with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is, of course, a strong ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We expect the president will still be working the phone, still trying to reach out to lawmakers while he's over there, but, of course, it's not quite the same as being able to sit here and have these face-to-face consultations. So, absolutely, the time crunch is on.
Right, absolutely. And an interesting picture right there with Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner on his right side there. Mary, I wanted to ask you about this because the G20 obviously focuses primarily on economic issues, and the president has been pushing pretty aggressively to get Syria put on some of the talking points in that meeting. How successful do you think, or does the White House expect that it will be in making that happen?
Syria will absolutely overshadow all of these economic discussions, of course. I think when you look at the official agenda, the economic discussions are at the top of all of that, but Syria will be the main topic of conversation, and especially on the sidelines there. But we'll have to wait and see how much progress they're able to make.
And what about the fact that the president does have the possibility, or certainly has the option, of calling Congress back early from recess? Does that even seem likely or plausible?
I wouldn't hold your breath on that one, Dan. I don't think that's going to be happen. As you mentioned, they're coming back on the 9th. The president is spending the rest of this week on this trip abroad, so I don't think we'll see from them. But, of course, that doesn't mean that they aren't taking steps now. We know that later this afternoon and tomorrow, key members of the administration will be testifying up on Capitol Hill before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So they are taking steps now in consultations with Congress, even though all of the members aren't back from their districts and their vacation just yet.
And, Devin, I want to go to you. Mary, thank you. Stay with us. Devin, I want to go to you, though, because I know that Senator John McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham met with the president over the weekend. Having their support is crucial, really, in convincing the rest of Congress, is it not?
That's right. It's a key step forward to have your former nemesis in the 2008 campaign back the military action that you're going to do, at least back it tentatively. John McCain and Lindsey Graham would like to see the president take even more aggressive action in Syria, but it did appear that they had a big endorsement. The president got a big endorsement there, but there's a division, as you know, Dan, inside the Republican Party right now over whether to continue to kind of this hawkish approach of say, Senator McCain, and there's a growing number of non-intervention interventionists, people like, say, Rand Paul, who don't want the president to get involved here and may filibuster any attempt to get this authorization. So the Senate, there's that 60-vote hurdle, that 60-vote marker that Harry Reid and people like John McCain are going to have to really work on reaching to get the president what he wants.
And what about the timeline for today? Because I know that he's meeting with Senate Foreign Relations Committee members today. And as far as the rest of the week, what kind of meetings are set up either to meet with the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense?
Well, the president's staff has really branded this what they're calling it a flood the zone strategy. They are holding conference calls with members of Congress even before they get back. You heard Mary touch on that there. Testifying on Capitol Hill this week several times. They're really trying to get that message out. And I want to emphasize what I thought the headline was in that in those comments you just heard from the president. He said the White House is essentially flexible on the type of authorization it receives. And that's the key here. They put forward a draft resolution over the weekend authorizing the president to take this action, but he said they are open to having Congress make some changes, perhaps put limits on how long this action could last, maybe say 60 days, or to put in writing that there will be no boots on the ground. So you're going to see a little bit of back and forth here between this White House and Congress in the days ahead, Dan.
And yet not having boots on the ground and a limited engagement, which are the two of the key points that the White House has really been hammering home. What is the possibility then about getting that convincing vote on the Hill? Have you been hearing one way or the other that Congress members have already made up their mind?
Our teams on the Hill have been talking to members of Congress, some of whom came back for a briefing over the weekend. Again, not everyone is back yet, so we're still starting to just hear from folks as they arrive in town. But the sense is that there are still a lot of questions out there. Members of Congress, a lot of them tending to kind of lean towards supporting the president here, wanting to show, present a front of unity behind the president, but very skeptical. Lots of questions still to be answered. Kind of the consensus in the chattering class of Washington is that it has a better chance of passing the Senate at this point than the Republican-controlled House, but certainly everything's up in the air, Dan.
All right, Mary, I want to go to you at the White House there. What is the White House saying if, in fact, they don't get congressional approval? Because that was one of the key components that the president had said on Saturday, that he obviously wanted to consult with members of Congress and along with the military to find out what kind of options are out there. But if, in fact, they don't get congressional support, what next?
Absolutely. If they don't go ahead and get this congressional support that the president is looking for, the White House hasn't said yet what the president will do, but they have made very clear that the president still has the authority to act unilaterally if he wants to. An interesting distinction there, that they are underlining that that is still an option. But again, they're holding out hope that Congress will, of course, give the president the authorization that he's looking for.
As we've been seeing in the past couple of days, has the rhetoric changed from the White House by indicating that they are, as Devin, as you pointed out, that they are more flexible in exploring other options?
Absolutely. We have heard, as Devin mentioned, there does seem to be some flexibility there. We know that the president wants a limited strike, but as we heard Senator McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham come out yesterday and suggest that they might be willing to look at more of a comprehensive strategy, that they might be willing to outline a little bit more the kind of support they want to give to the opposition, that the administration wants to boost the opposition. So things like that, that there is a little bit of wiggle room here still as going forward as they try and negotiate with Congress.
Devin, I want to get your thoughts on that as well, please.
You're also starting to hear a little bit of greater emphasis on the importance of a strike in deterring our rivals like Iran and North Korea. You heard a little bit from the president there say, what does it look like if the world, the international community draws these red lines and the United States warns of consequences and no one acts? And so you're starting to hear a little bit more from the White House on the significance of a move here with respect to Iran and not just Syria. And that's a big message that I think you're going to hear going forward in the next few days.
Well, and I want to get both of your thoughts about that, because we look at not only domestically the kind of support that the president needs to build, but also the international level in the community, and especially with Russia now rejecting the evidence that the U.S. has been using to build its case. What kind of a hurdle then does the White House have to overcome then to kind of build a coalition, even if it doesn't get a UN sanction?
I think that's one of the top priorities, of course, when the president heads to Russia this week, is to absolutely try and build as much international support as he can. But we know that the U.S. Is willing to act alone, is willing to go it alone without the support of its international partners. It's something the U.S. obviously would like to have, but it's not absolutely necessary at this point.
Devin, what about that? Is there still an emphasis now on, obviously, that vote in Great Britain last week was a huge shock and somewhat of a blow to the U.S.'s strongest ally?
That's right. You're going to see President Obama when he gets to Russia later this week really try to put some of these allies on the spot. Allies like Japan, France, Spain, others who participated with this administration in that intervention in Libya in 2011. Try to get those allies who have now given sort of moral support to President Obama in intervening in Syria to get them to stand up and appear with him publicly and possibly even contribute military resources to an action in Syria. That's what he's going to be going for. It's this very public commitments to show publicly, photo ops, things like that, that this administration has the backing of the international community, Dan.
And Mary, and I wanted to ask you before we let you go about that, because obviously losing the support of Great Britain was certainly something that the White House maybe didn't necessarily anticipate. Has the White House said that they're going to kind of reach out and explore any of these other options, or to somehow garner support that Parliament couldn't provide?
There's no question that the decision by the British Parliament was a huge blow to this administration and to their hope to gather that kind of international support. At this point, there's not a whole lot that they can do going forward. We know that the British government has said they're going to, of course, abide by the desires of their parliament and not go ahead and back this military intervention. So now, as Devin mentioned, the Obama administration is going to have to look to their other allies to make that public show of support.
What about, and either one of you answer this, as you choose, but what about the fact of the UN findings? It's still a couple of weeks away yet. Has the White House, I don't want to say downplay the significance of whatever results those inspectors actually found, but has the focus been shifting more onto building off of off of our U.S. intelligence rather than relying on those UN inspectors?
Well, that's been their line from the beginning, Dan, is that they don't, from the very beginning here, that they don't need to wait for the UN at all, that there is sufficient U.S. intelligence that demonstrates that chemical weapons were used here, that they were used by the Assad regime, and that regardless of what the UN finds, they don't, need any permission. It's also interesting to note that that UN investigation, those samples, by the way, did just arrive today for testing at The Hague, but that investigation was only to determine whether or not chemical weapons were used. Those investigators with the UN were not there to determine who used them. So the Obama administration's case is that at the end of the day, even if the UN does come out and say, okay, it looks like a chemical was used, which the U.S. already claims did happen, the answer of who used them is still going to be an open one from the UN perspective, and the U.S. has the evidence.
All right. ABC's Devin Dwyer in Washington and ABC's Mary Bruce at the White House. Both of you, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Of course, we have a complete report on abcnews.com as the president is making his case on military action in Syria. For now, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York with this ABC News Digital Special Report.
This has been a special report from ABC News Digital.